You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules. And of course, let's get right to the case that divided a small suburb of Boston. Well, it actually divided a jury as well. Obviously, I'm talking about the Karen Reed murder trial. She was accused of backing over her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, after a night of drinking. And she was, by her own admission, dropping John off at a party of a fellow law enforcement official, and Karen was going to return to her home. She also agreed to check on John's niece and nephew. Well, Karen said she did not hit John with her Lexus, and she was not the reason he died hours later in a winter snowstorm outside of Brian Albert's home. Her defense said the murder charge was part of an elaborate police cover-up that included family members, in-laws, other investigators, and even a potential dog attack. Now, the state said it was clear and simple. Karen backed over John, and he died hours later in the snow. Well, after 2 months of testimony, 74 witnesses testifying, 650 pieces of admitted evidence, and 27 hours of deliberation, the jury was deadlocked, and the judge had no other choice than to determine a mistrial. Now, the mistrial was declared on Monday afternoon, but the judge knew the case was in trouble on Friday, when around noon on that day, the jury sent a note to the judge saying they were hopelessly deadlocked. The note said that despite the jury's exhaustive review of the evidence and also the jury's diligent consideration of all disputed evidence, they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. Well, the judge did not accept that answer, and she told the jury that they had not deliberated long enough. She sent them back to complete Friday afternoon deliberations. Well, the jury then went home for the weekend, but returned on Monday, and by 11 a.m., they knew they were at a standstill. The judge read aloud the note that the jury returned to her bench on Monday morning. It said, "Despite our commitment to the duty entrusted to us, we find ourselves deeply divided by fundamental differences in our opinions and state of mind. The divergence in our views are not rooted in a lack of understanding or effort, but instead deeply held convictions that each of us carry, ultimately leading to a point where consensus is unattainable. We recognize the weight of this admission and the implications it holds." Well, after the decision, Karen Reed hugged her family members, and she now is a free woman until charges are readdressed. And it's not lost on the state that they will have to go back to the same exact set of people, those who live in the Norfolk County area. And they go back to that juror pool expecting to find about 18 people that have little to no knowledge of the case. That is nearly impossible since this case has been likened to the East Coast version of the O.J. Simpson trial. But the overall answer is yes. The state is saying they will retry this case. A scheduling conference is set for July 22nd, and if the case moves forward after July 22nd, it will be months, if not years, before the case would go before a jury again. All right, so let's dissect it. What caused the jury to not be able to resolve this case? Why not a guilty or a not guilty verdict? The defense scored small victories by exploring the third-party defense. Okay, that's the defense saying someone else was responsible for John's death. Evidence showed that Karen dropped John off just after midnight. The defense said John went inside Brian Albert's home, and there, an argument between John and ATF agent Brian Higgins broke out. They said John was correctly assuming that Brian had a romantic interest in Karen. And text messages later proved that Karen and Brian Higgins indeed had been chatting. The defense said John was impaired by the alcohol and that Brian, in a physical fight, knocked John unconscious, and that's when the plotting inside Brian Albert's home began. The defense had cell phone experts testify that Jennifer McCabe, okay, that's Brian Albert's sister-in-law. Well, the expert testified that Jennifer made a Google search on her cell phone at 2:27 a.m. That search read, "How long to die in the cold?" Now, this was key evidence for the defense to show the jury that Jennifer should not have known that someone was dying in the snow. She should have, at 2:27 a.m., been an innocent and unknowing bystander. If Karen hit John,
she should not have known he was outside dying in the snow. Well, Jennifer claimed that the timestamp of 2:27 a.m. was incorrect, that she performed that exact search much later in the morning hours, after Karen and her had begun searching for John. Now, the defense also said that there was no way John was dying outside for 2 hours, basically from 12:30 to 2:30, because a snowplow driver passed by the house 3 separate times before 2:30 a.m. They told jurors no driver could make 3 passes and not see a man dying in the snow. And then there was the cover-up angle. And here's truly where the community became divided. Karen's attorney said lead investigator Michael Proctor with the Massachusetts State Police was, well, dirty. He alleged that Michael Proctor, quote, erected a tall blue wall. This was in order to protect Brian Albert. Proctor was a fellow LEO and also a close family friend. Remember, he's the guy running the investigation. Even people who thought Karen was guilty had to question why a close family friend was running the investigation. Now, Karen's attorney said that Proctor planted evidence, like pieces of a taillight from the Lexus SUV, and that he planted those on Brian Albert's front lawn. And also, those pieces were gathered days after John's death. Now, Proctor was also forced to acknowledge on the stand that he had sent derogatory text messages to friends about Karen Reed. Those texts called Karen a, quote, whack job. And those texts also complained that he unfortunately hadn't found any nudes on the phone. All right, so those on the jury, who were not able to mark guilty on their jury form, might have been reflecting about these parts of the testimony and evidence shared over the 2 previous months. But what about those that thought Karen was guilty? Well, they might have been reflecting on the fact that Karen Reed herself said the words, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. That was after finding his body cold and stiff in the snow on that January morning. Now, the state also admitted text messages that showed a relationship between Karen and John that was imploding. Those closest to them also testified that the two were constantly arguing. They also admitted evidence that Karen was impaired by alcohol on the night in question, and that she was, at a minimum, driving impaired, and they believe that led her to back over John in a fit of rage. Here's what they say happened. They say John got out of the vehicle and walked a distance. Then Karen put that SUV in reverse and backed up about 60 feet, gaining a speed of 24 miles per hour, and that is how she created enough force to injure a man so severely that he laid in the snow and died. Now, the state also played a voicemail from just a few minutes after the alleged time of killing, where Karen is screaming at John the following, John, I effing hate you, except she said the full word. Now, the state also questioned the fact that when it was still dark at 6 a.m. in the morning, that Karen could see exactly where John's body was lying lifeless in the snow. They claimed she knew exactly where to look for him because she knew where she had killed him. Now, it's been reported that Karen was willing to testify at trial, but that her attorneys advised against her doing so. And the fallout from the mistrial rained down on Michael Proctor on Tuesday. The Massachusetts State Police announced that Trooper Michael Proctor has been relieved of his duties. Here's what they said in a statement. Upon learning today's result, the department took immediate action to relieve Trooper Michael Proctor of duty and formally transfer him out of the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office State Police Detectives Unit. Now, all of this follows our previous decision to open an internal affairs investigation after information about serious misconduct emerged in testimony at the trial. This investigation is ongoing. Now, in legal speak, that means they're probably done talking about it because they are conducting that investigation. A reporter with NBC 10 out of Boston approached Michael Proctor and his wife Elizabeth outside their Canton home. They wanted comment about the mistrial. Both of them told the reporter to get off their lawn.
The reporter was not on their lawn. She was actually on the street. And then Elizabeth told the reporter that she fully supports her husband, and she finished her comments by saying, Karen Reed is a murderer. Now, Proctor did apologize for the unprofessional comments on the stand, But the vulgar texts were sharply criticized in and out of court, including from Governor Maura Healey. She told WCVB this about those vulgar texts. She said, "It's completely unprofessional. It does harm, frankly, to the dignity and the integrity of the work of the men and women across the state police and law enforcement agencies. So as a former attorney general and as governor, I am disgusted by all of that." All right, well, all of that leads me to a question. Was it possibly just one person holding out? One juror who said, "I can't write down guilty"? Well, according to an interview with the Boston Globe, Tracy Minor, she's a longtime defense attorney out of the Boston area. She said the notes from the jury have led her to believe that it was definitely more than one person holding out on the not guilty or guilty side. She said the wording reflects that multiple jurors could not agree with each other. She also said the jurors' note should give the prosecution and even Karen's lawyers reason to pause, that they should re-examine who they call as witnesses and how they question them. And Brian T. Kelly, who is a former federal prosecutor, said nobody wants to retry this case exactly the way it was tried over the last 2 months. He claimed doing that would be like putting on a wet bathing suit. You need to remember, these trials are costly. And yes, there should be no price on justice. But the last 2 months resulted in nothing other than a redo with a really expensive price tag. And former Suffolk County District Attorney Daniel Connolly, well, he said he doesn't see a big advantage for either side here. Again, leading us to believe that this mistrial was not just the result of one holdout juror. Former Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley said that one change that might occur in the second trial is a lessening of the charges against Karen. Another change could be a more pleasant plea deal option for Karen. She also reminded everyone that the decision to retry Karen Read is one that will be made by the Commonwealth, but also by conferencing with John O'Keefe's family. They may not be up for another trial, and that could change the decision by the state attorneys. One juror has spoken out since the mistrial was declared. That's juror number 3. She was an alternate, and she told WBZ-TV that she was exhausted and disappointed at the same time. She said she took A+ level notes during the trial and that she felt the Commonwealth did not do their job in convincing her beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen Read was guilty of the charges. She said the trial was tragic and that watching both the families of Karen and John was just plain painful. She said the jury is made up of lovely people who worked well together. She said they even celebrated a few birthdays together over the 2 months of the trial. Well, finally, in this case, at least for this report, Boston.com asked readers to respond to an online poll, and over 3,000 readers weighed in. They were asked if they were surprised the jurors in the Karen Read trial couldn't come to a unanimous decision. Well, more than 3,000 Boston.com readers responded to the poll by Tuesday morning, and the majority, 61%, said they were not surprised jurors could not reach a verdict. 39% said they were surprised. Readers, like the jurors, were also divided over whether prosecutors met their burden of proof. Many who voted that they were not surprised the case was ruled a mistrial said the evidence presented in the case was just simply too confusing for jurors to interpret and come to a unanimous decision. In addition, many of those responders called the investigation by the Massachusetts State Police, quote, compromised and corrupt. Of course, this one is not over. I'll keep you updated when relevant information comes forward. And for our next story, we need to head to Shasta County, California, and a horrific night of alleged abuse that happened back in December of last year. And that abuse may have foreshadowed an even more disturbing act that we don't have an ending to just yet. All right, it was December 1st, and in the late evening hours, when Nikki McCain walked into the Mercy Hospital in Redding, California. She was visibly injured and was asking for help in reporting abuse that she had suffered. The reporting officer stepped into Nikki's assigned room in the emergency department and could see from across the room that both of Nikki's eyes were blackened, her face was swollen, and she had abrasions on her forehead and neck. Now, his first question for Nikki, "Who did this to you?" And without hesitation, she answered that her husband, Tyler, had beat her for 3 hours. He turned on his recording device and asked her to explain what had happened. And the story she told was one of nightmares. Nikki said she and her husband had been married for 16 years and that they were the parents to 4 children, but that none of them were currently living with the couple. She said on the night of the abuse, she came home at 8 p.m. and that Tyler wasn't there. She went into her bedroom and began combing her hair. And the night seemed just fine until Tyler came home 15 minutes later. And she had seen this Tyler before. She said he was in a strange mood, and he walked directly to the back door of their home and turned the lock. He was acting erratic, jumbling up sentences and moving quickly. When he entered the bedroom, he attacked Nikki, knocking her to the ground, then dragging her across the bedroom and screaming the phrase over and over again, "What's going on? What's going on?" Nikki said she could see that his eyes were glazed and that he was acting like he was having a manic episode. She then used her practiced responses and tried to calm Tyler, but he couldn't be soothed. She told the officer he kept verbally abusing her until that wasn't enough. He then pushed her to the ground and while on top of her began slapping and punching her in the face with both open and closed fists. During the attack, she said he pulled her hair and dumped an ice-cold container of water on her body. After that initial part of the attack, she said Tyler bound her ankles and wrists together with white tape. He then tore off several pieces of tape and covered her mouth. She said he then rolled her to her stomach, got on top of her, and repeatedly pulled her head back by her hair while screaming that he was going to kill her. Now, she did say Tyler would take breaks during the hours-long abuse, but he then would return to hit her again, only to then get up and leave her bound on the floor. She told the officer she was sure she was going to die. Now, the officer was staring at a woman who was just 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed less than 100 pounds. She was no match for the physically much stronger and bigger attacker. She told the officer it wasn't the first time, but this was the worst time. Now, Nikki said after about 2 hours that Tyler had left the room again, and she believed he was in the kitchen. She let some time go by, and then she gained enough strength to undo the tape from her wrists and ankles and grab the car keys from her pocket. She told the officer she knew this was the only way to make it out alive. She ran from the bedroom to the front door and towards the car. Tyler chased her out of the house and jumped on the hood of the car. As she drove away toward her sister's home, Tyler slid off the hood. Now, after arriving at her sister's home and recovering for just a couple of days, they made their way to the ER. And now Nikki was in a place she had never found herself before, a place where she had finally reported the alleged abuse. Officers were dispatched to Nikki and Tyler's home, and Tyler was taken in for questioning, where he allegedly freely spoke with investigators, even after his Miranda rights had been established. In that interview, Tyler admitted that he knew about Nikki's injuries, but he believed that she had gotten into a physical argument with a female. And then he made a wild claim that Nikki was having an affair with a woman. But he also claimed that he and Nikki had a healthy relationship and that they never argued. And of course, he said they had never gotten physical with one another during a disagreement. Now, despite denying the abuse, Tyler was arrested and he was charged with 4 felony counts of abuse. And a search of Tyler and Nikki's home led investigators to discover 5 firearms, including an AK-47 type rifle that was linked to a stolen firearms report out of Oregon. Officers also discovered the discarded white tape from Nikki's ankles and wrists lying on the floor in the bedroom. Now, during the next few months, the two became estranged, and Nikki's family tried to protect Nikki from danger, but it wasn't enough. 39-year-old Nikki was texting her sister on the night of May 17th. Now, she was letting her sister know that she was shuffling vehicles. It seems, and this is a little uncertain depending upon reports, but it seems she was picked up by a ride-sharing cab, like Uber, somewhere near the Wind River Casino, and then she was dropped off at the home she shared with Tyler, and then she vanished. And it's been 6 weeks, and no one has heard from Nikki. The family reacted quickly, involving law enforcement in instituting searches. 1 week later, Nikki's 2002 light gray Chevy Avalanche was found abandoned in Cottonwood, California. Except, you guys, that's a remote area. And no one put two and two together until 5 days after that Chevy Avalanche had been found. And that's when they figured out that Nikki was missing and this was her vehicle. Well, the family seized on the opportunity and they searched the area where the Chevy pickup was located, but nothing was discovered. And then on June 9th, a second extensive search was conducted on the tribal grounds near that Wind River Casino. Again, nothing was found. Now, between those two searches, Tyler was back in court for a settlement conference on the 4 felony charges stemming from the December alleged assault. And in those court proceedings for Tyler, his trial was once again delayed and is now going to be possibly dismissed. The judge is set to rule on the dismissal tomorrow. Tyler's attorneys are claiming there isn't enough evidence to carry forward with a trial. And of course, the victim is missing and cannot testify. That means there's nobody there to say, hey, this is what happened to me. So then how do you do a trial with Tyler? All right, you guys, where's Nikki? Her family is distraught over the disappearance, and they are also showing discontent with the lack of urgency by law enforcement. Those searches that I referenced, they've all been family and community led. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office has not been actively participating in those searches. For their part, the Sheriff's Office has released a statement saying the case is active and that detectives continue to work diligently on the investigation. They're also choosing to not release details they have learned during their investigation because they say they are hoping to maintain the integrity of their work. All right, that's understandable, but also the family feeling like they have been left in the dark is understandable as well. Now, if you're listening to this and have information about Nikki or anything that's related to Nikki's case, you can call 530-245-6135. A $10,000 reward is being offered for information leading to Nikki's safe return. And Nikki, as mentioned, is under 5 feet tall, and she weighs somewhere around 100 pounds. She has brownish red hair and brown eyes. She also has a tattoo of a floral design on her left forearm. Her sister had this to say about Nikki. Nikki is a very, very caring person. She wouldn't have left. She would not have disappeared on her own. This is very, very out of character for her. And this is why it's very urgent that we find her. All right, you guys, awareness is the key in cases like this one. And Noah Pressgrove, who I covered out of Oklahoma, and Caleb Harris, who I've covered a couple of times out of Texas. I'm watching all of those particular cases, and I will keep you updated. And finally today, these poisoning stories, they just keep on coming. Mostly these poisoning stories are wives who have become frustrated with their husband's behaviors, and they resort to poison to solve their problems. All right, let's get to this one. 47-year-old Michelle Peters, an esthetician from Missouri, well, she resorted to poisoning, allegedly, except she was reckless enough to get caught on a home surveillance camera concocting the poison soda she left for her husband. All right, Michelle told the authorities that it all started when she threw a 50th birthday party for her husband, who we're going to call D. Michelle said D wasn't appreciative of all the hard work that went into the party, so she decided to enact some revenge. Beginning around the 1st of May, D noticed that some of the 2-liter Mountain Dew bottles that he kept in his garage fridge, he said they started to taste a little funny. I'm going to pause here. I want you to raise your hand if you have a garage fridge. I had one growing up. I didn't have one in college or for maybe the first 2 years of my married life. But since then, for those last 28 years, I've had a garage fridge. And we don't even have that big of a family. I've got 3 kids. But when they're all here with their spouses, that makes a house of 8. And then there's 1 grandchild. So the garage fridge is heaven sent during those times. I just don't know how, prevalent this is across the nation or even in other countries to have an extra fridge. All right, back to the story. So D goes out to that garage fridge to pour himself some Mountain Dew, and he notices that the soda kind of tastes a little funky. He keeps drinking it though, and then after a couple of weeks, he starts noticing that his throat is irritated. He's had a touch of nausea, and along with all of that, there's been some diarrhea and some vomiting. And things accelerated when he began coughing up thick, brownish yellow mucus. Well, this has made Dee get very suspicious. So he starts looking back at old camera footage just to see if anyone is messing with the garage fridge. That's when he discovered footage from June 12th. Dee could plainly see his wife, Michelle, grab a bottle of Roundup weed killer and one of the 2-liter bottles of soda from the fridge in the garage. In the video, she takes both of those things into the house. And then a few minutes later, she returns on the camera and places the soda back in the garage fridge and the Roundup back on the shelf. Now, Dee felt like he needed to maybe do just a little bit more detective work. So he purchased new, unopened bottles of Mountain Dew to see if Michelle might tamper with those. He told authorities that she did, in fact, open the bottles and added weed killer. He then checked the bottle of Roundup and realized that it was almost empty. Okay, knowing Michelle might be poisoning him, he mentioned to her that he was feeling sick. He said she rationalized that he probably had COVID-19 and that he should stay away from the grandkids. And that's when Dee felt like he had enough information to involve law enforcement. He presented them with the camera footage and also the story, and then police arrested Michelle last week and charged her with first-degree assault and armed criminal action. After those charges were filed, authorities asked Dee why he thought Michelle might want to poison him. He said he didn't think his wife was having an affair, but he thought that she might be trying to collect the $500,000 life insurance policy. He also told the investigators that Michelle had drastically reduced the amount of money that she had been transferring to their personal account from her business account. Well, investigators, all armed with the information, visited the couple's home. They removed the nearly empty bottle of weed killer and also another bottle of Roundup that was located in the garage, and then also the 2-liter bottle of soda, and yet another bottle of insecticide located inside the home. Then investigators asked Michelle to come in and chat, and she agreed. And during that chat, she claimed she had seen an idea on Pinterest where you mixed Mountain Dew with Roundup to make an even more potent weed killer for her yard. Well, investigators must have treated that like a bogus excuse because they arrested Michelle for poisoning her husband. And following the arrest, Michelle told authorities about being upset over Dee's lack of appreciation for the 50th birthday celebration that she had planned and executed. She called Dee selfish, and she told authorities she should have just divorced the man. And remember how this poisoning allegedly started in May? Well, back in March, that was just 2 months prior, Michelle posted a graphic on her social media account that encouraged couples to consider what they could do differently to have unity in all of their relationships. Oh, the irony. Well, at the time of this recording, Michelle was being held in the county detention center with no bond available. All right, you guys, that's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you for joining me twice a week. And if you're really, truly loving this content, which I hope you are, please share this show with a friend, a coworker, somebody in your life. And please leave a comment. That always makes more traffic and the show can grow. And of course, follow and like us on all of our various accounts, our social media accounts. We love you here at Oh No Media, and we're grateful that you're sharing these experiences with us. You can join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.